I said, "You'll never be half the man my ex-husband is." He packed his bags the next morning. You know the popular saying that has something to do with words having power? Well, I think I underestimated that power that words are said to have. I took my words too far, and for such a careless action, I was hit with a reality so hard and heavy that I will forever live to regret it. I was the kind of person that said hurtful things whenever I was angry or hurt, and I was particularly the type that didn't think that what I said mattered. In my mind, I wasn't physically attacking anybody, so it didn't matter. I just needed to pour out my heart. I saw it as a healthy mechanism to pour your heart out when you're angry, but that was definitely not the case. And I soon realized that people had emotions, people were made up of emotions, and emotions can be harmed by words. I didn't think about that. I didn't see things like, and that was a problem that cost me my marriage. My husband and I had been married for 3 years, and we were the kind of couple that didn't argue or fight, and I loved that. In my eyes, that made us very compatible. I saw the couples that argued and fought as people who were forcing themselves to be together. I thought that they were not a match, and the universe was giving them signs to not be together anymore, but they were not taking those signs. Jamie, my darling husband, made sure we didn't have any need to argue. He provided for my needs, and when things didn't go either of our way, we'd just take a breather. But I guess no one can truly live without confrontation. And soon, Jamie and I had an argument that was more heated than the center of the sun. It was the day I mixed a red t-shirt in the washing machine with all his white work shirts for the week, and they all came out red. That day was not just in my favor. It was like everything I did turned out wrongly. When he saw what had happened, he was speechless as well. He couldn't understand how I could be so careless, but even then he kept his cool, trying his best to not shout at me or get angry. But things got a lot worse when I broke a beautiful set of ceramic plates which shattered all over the floor. He was helping me mop the living room when the plates shattered and he hurried to come check on me. But he ran in blindly and stepped on one of the broken pieces which injured his legs. He screamed and even jumped in pain. I was so worried about him, but angered by the fact that he just ran in blindly. That was when I shouted at him, asking him if he was that stupid to run into the kitchen like he was bulletproof when he clearly heard the sound of plates breaking. He looked at me in surprise and asked me how I could say such a thing when he came in to check on me. He told me that he was only injured because he was worried about me. Without skipping a heartbeat, I called him clumsy and told him that only a fool acts the way he did. He couldn't believe I was saying those words to him. He even asked me what was wrong with me, and I told him that I was just so pissed at him. I asked him what would have happened if I was injured and now he was injured as well. Who would have taken care of the other? He was speechless. His eyes carried an expression that I had never seen in his face before. It was shock, not the kind of shock you get when your friends throw you a surprise birthday party. This was a completely different shock, one he couldn't explain or understand where all this was coming from. He mustered up his courage and opened his mouth to give me an answer. He told me that he might have been very clumsy, but it didn't warrant me to talk to him in such a manner. I could have ended it there, but I went on and told him that I have the right to talk to him however I wanted, because when it comes to the both of us, he was slow at thinking, and I hated slow thinkers. My husband could not believe this. He was beyond bewildered. In fact, the words needed to describe his surprise have not been created. I was an absolutely terrible person. The words I spatted out annoyed my husband so much that he got up and walked out on his own. I kept calling him, but he didn't give me any heed. He was so upset that he literally walked to a clinic with his injured foot. When he got back later that day, I was so mad at him that I accused him of being very childish and told him that what he did was not worthy of a man. I was completely brutal with him, and he was so angry that he told me to shut up. I couldn't believe it. I gave him a strict warning, asking him to never tell me to shut up. I went on rambling, and he probably saw that there wasn't going to be any solutions, so he decided to take some things and go to his workshop where he made carvings with wood. He went in there and locked himself in. I was so furious that I began cleaning the house just to make me calm down, although it didn't help much. It was a few hours after that my husband came out of the store. I was ready for another intense moment of argument between us, but when I met my husband, he gave me a kiss that silenced me and handed me the little wooden horse he had made. Just like that, our argument died off. Jamie was quite special. He knew how to make me feel good and pamper me, and I loved being pampered, especially by him. Just that single action of his made me calm and quiet. It worked so well that it was impossible to believe. But the point was that my husband had seen a side of me that he had never seen before, and I had no idea what that did to him. Everything went back to normal after that day. I never apologized for the harsh words I used on him and the extreme tone that I communicated those harsh words with. And for some reason, he never brought it up. I never knew if he was angry or not, but most importantly, I never thought about it back then. And he wasn't the type to hold a grudge, so maybe that was why I wasn't worried. But then something else happened about a month later. An incident happened that was entirely his fault. You know, the first incident was my fault, and I had a streak of wrongdoings that day, but somehow I still found a way to make everything his fault and insult him for it. But this next one was entirely his fault, and you should have seen the way I tore him apart. I asked him to buy some potatoes and bread from the market on his way back from work. It was a very simple errand that didn't need any confusion and that didn't need to sprout any hostility, but when he returned, he came with the wrong type of potatoes and wrong bread product. I asked him why he bought that particular bread product and why he bought sweet potatoes instead of Irish potatoes. He didn't see anything wrong with what he had done. In his eyes, potatoes were potatoes and bread was bread. I asked him if he had ever seen me buying or using sweet potato ever before, and if he had seen me eating any other bread product apart from my favorite, which he clearly didn't buy. I was already heating up in rage, and he could see this. He looked me straight in the eyes and told me that it didn't matter, that I should just manage the ones he got for now, and that later he would get me the ones I like. Like I said, it was a simple situation that needed a simple solution, which was understanding. But understanding was not a language I understood or spoke, so I flared up with harsh words. I asked him if he smashed his head as a child, because there was no way he could possibly be that dense in the head naturally. The way his eyes widened when I said those words was nothing short of satisfying. He asked me if I was being serious, and my reply to him was asking if he was that slow not to understand what I was saying. It was like I was talking to a rock. He told me not to talk to him like that, but I didn't back down. I asked him how I was talking to him. But it was a rhetorical question because I gave the answer myself. I knew I was talking to him like a child I didn't like. I told him I talked to him as a child if he was hell-bent on behaving like one. And it made me feel like my words were justified. Because why else would a full-grown man who has lived with me and been married to me for a good number of years now still not know my favorite product or the kind of potatoes I use in the house? It was annoying, and it made me feel as though I got married to an idiot. In his attempt to not exchange words with me and have a heated night, he tried walking away, maybe going to his workshop to take a moment to himself, but I grabbed him by the back of his shirt and told him that he wasn't going anywhere. He looked at me with bewildered eyes. I can remember his specific reaction. He first called my name and asked me what the hell was wrong with me that day. I told him that he was the thing that was wrong with me. I told him that he was giving me a hard time because all he had to do was to do the right thing, and he specifically chose not to do the right thing. I even made it seem as though he did that on purpose. I told him that he didn't want me to eat dinner that night, which was why he bought whatever he felt like. He gave a frustrated chuckle and asked what he had to gain from making me not eat dinner. He pointed out that it was his money he used to buy the food, so if I didn't eat the food, it was his money that was wasted. I didn't see the logic in anything he was saying. All that mattered to me was that he didn't buy what I needed, and as such, I was going to be hungry throughout the night. He got exhausted and told me to stop making a big deal out of something so little, and that was when I lost my mind. I told him he was gaslighting me, and he didn't take my opinions and feelings seriously. I called him a bad husband, and I even told him that he was lucky to have me, because if it were anybody else, they would have walked away. I said a lot of things that night, things I wish I could take back, but I can't. Just to make matters worse, I even asked him what he was thinking about with that childish brain of his that he couldn't remember his wife's favorite bread at least. Things were going too far, and my husband asked me to let go of him, but I firmly refused. I told him, but I wouldn't let him go. That was when he asked me what I wanted him to do. He asked me if I wanted him to go get the bread I wanted and the potatoes that I normally use. I think I was a troublemaker and seeker, because if I had said yes, he would have gone to get it, and all this incessant fighting would have ceased, but I refused. I told him that he wanted to go spend more money so he would blame it on me in the future. He was so lost when I said that because it didn't make any sense to him. I told him I wouldn't fall for his trap. He told me that there was no trap, that he just wanted to settle this issue because he was tired and needed rest. Then I asked him if he was saying that I wasn't letting him rest. Without even blinking, he told me that I wasn't letting him rest. I was so bitter and angered by that word. I think I was honestly delusional, because why else would I be so annoyed by the truth? I started crying and saying that my husband hates me. He was so shocked and asked me what the heck I was talking about because he did not understand where all of that was coming from. He held my arms and asked me what he could do right there that would solve the issue. I told him that there was nothing he could do because he didn't want to solve anything. I even took it further by saying that he just didn't want to look like the bad person, so he was pretending that he cared. My husband was losing his mind. I didn't realize the emotional abuse I was putting him through. Well, I didn't think anything I was doing was that deep or effective. In my mind, I was just communicating how I felt. Without realizing that the words I chose to phrase my emotions with were damaging to other people, my husband grabbed his hair with both his hands and groaned in frustration. Then he asked me if I was after his life. I was stunned. I think that was the first time that I was shocked that night, and I became even wilder. I guess he saw that, and he had decided that he wouldn't put up with anything else that night, so he pulled away from my grasp, but because my hold was too strong, his shirt tore as he pulled away, and I held an entire piece of it. Lucky for him, he escaped and left the house. Before I could stop him, he had already gotten in his car and driven off as fast as he could. That could have been the perfect point for me to self-reflect and ask myself why my husband would run away from me like I was some sort of wild animal that was after his life. But I didn't think about it like that. All I could think about was how he had sabotaged me and how I was going to sleep hungry that night. I didn't care that there was leftover food in the fridge. I didn't sleep that night. I thought my husband would come back, so I stayed awake, waiting for him to arrive. But he did not. The next morning, he still didn't come back. I guess he went to work from wherever he slept. I was so frustrated, but I decided to hold my peace. I knew that he would come back eventually. After all, he can't run forever. And like I predicted that evening, he came home after work. I was in the living room when he walked in. He saw me sitting there and didn't say a word. He just continued to the room, and after a few minutes, I went into the room. He was in the bathroom, so I waited for him. When he came out, I asked him where he had been. He didn't stutter. He just told me that he had been somewhere safe and calm. I couldn't believe that he said that to me. I sprang up from the bed where I was sitting and looked him in the eyes as I asked him with a lot more seriousness in my voice. I could see that he was pissed and unfazed by my dramatics. I don't know what happened, but it looked like he was not even the tiniest bit bothered by me. He was confident and not worried, and that made me worried. I held the towel around his waist and asked him again where he had been, and my husband's eyes got darker. He told me that he didn't know what gave me the idea or even the courage to think that I could talk to him the way I do and grab him the way I do without any repercussions. But he gave me a strict warning that if I didn't let go of him, he was going to do something he might regret. I wasn't one to back down, so I laughed and even dared him to do his worst. He looked at me with haunting eyes and told me to let go of him, but I didn't move an inch. My hold on his towel tightened. While the moment was getting heated by the second, a sudden knock on the front door pulled both our attention. I didn't want to let go of my husband, so I didn't care to answer whoever was at the door. Instead, I held the towel even firmer. I told him that we were not going anywhere until he told me where he slept the previous night. My husband chuckled and looked up at the ceiling, muttering something about how he had married the devil without knowing it. I was appalled by this, and just as I wanted to slap him, he caught my hand. And with a serious tone, he told me that he didn't know the kind of relationship I was in before, and that maybe my ex let me slap him however and whenever I wanted, but he was not my ex. He strictly warned me that I was never to touch him in that manner or even dare to try it again. He looked like a different person entirely. He was more ferocious. I realized that perhaps by raising my hand, I was taking things too far, and I decided to switch back to my words, but even I could not grasp how extreme my words had become. And so I laughed, and the words that came out of my mouth next were, "You'll never be half the man my ex-husband is." My husband paused. Every bit of movement in his body seemed to have stopped, including the ragged beating of his heart. Everything paused for a second. No words came out of his mouth. He didn't say anything in reply or retaliation. He just looked at me and shook his head, and the next thing he said was that marrying me was a mistake. He said it with so much disappointment in his voice that I couldn't believe it. I think that was when I realized how much power words could carry, because that one hit me like an avalanche. I felt my chest hurt, like there was a heavy ache that I could not fight back. I looked at him, not being able to comprehend where those words came from all of a sudden. I felt whack. Then I told him that he might be saying that, but I knew he didn't mean it. He let out an evil chuckle and told me that he meant it with every fiber of his being. He said that he had tried to be patient with me, to ignore my excesses and my flaws, to overlook my shortcomings and not comment on them, That was why we went so long without arguing. It was like some sort of veil was being lifted from my eyes, and I was being made to understand just how delusional I was. He said that as of late, I had decided to show him who I truly was, and that I released a monster that he never thought could be inside a human being. These words hurt me so badly. I was getting a taste of my own medicine, and the next thing he said that I wasn't expecting was that he was done. I asked him what he meant by that. I asked him what he was done with. And he shook his head, saying that I really was deluded. He said that he was done with me as a whole, that he didn't want anything to do with me any longer. With that, he grabbed my hand and pulled it away from his towel. Update. My life feels like a movie. I sit back and think about all the things that I did that I wish I could take back. I remembered all the things I'd say and do that were insulting to my husband, but he never raised his voice at me or even cautioned me. Perhaps he was hoping that I would learn what to do and not do, what not to say and what to say, and most importantly, how to say what I want to say in the proper and polite tone. Maybe he was expecting me to adapt, but that was not the case. I never learned. I never adapted. Rather, I got worse by the minute. If only I could have seen the future, maybe, just maybe, I could have done things differently. After our very heated confrontation, my husband went into his workshop and didn't come out until the next morning. And when he came out, you won't believe the first thing he did. He pulled out his bags and boxes, packed all his clothes, put them in the car, and drove off. I didn't think he was being serious. I knew we had an extreme argument the previous day, but I honestly didn't think it was enough for him to pack up his things and leave. Maybe I was just downplaying the magnitude of what had happened that day. Maybe that was my coping mechanism. But everything that happened from that day onward still didn't feel real to me. Next thing I saw was a notice ordering me to vacate the house. Apparently, my husband had sold the house even without my notice. And he could do that because the house was registered in his name. Perhaps it was because he paid for the house single-handedly, but I didn't expect the earth under my feet to be swept up from right under me. I was so confused and perplexed. I wondered if this was his way of getting back at me for all the times I hurt his feelings, but they were just words. It's not worth him taking things this far over. If this was his way of punishing me, then he was being a bit too extreme, but I had no idea just how far he was willing to go. Because barely a few days after I got that notice, I tried reaching out to my husband, and he actually answered after days of ignoring me. He told me never to reach out to him again and that I should move on. I thought he was joking, but he ended the call, and when I tried calling him back, he had blocked my number. Last I heard, he was dating another woman, and I still can't wrap my head around it. I lost someone so important and valuable to me, and I am still clueless as to why exactly he decided to take such drastic steps. I guess I've learned the value of words, but still, words don't hurt the body, so why would he take things this far? I had to move back to my parents' house, and I am more lost now than I have ever been.